Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's that time of week again, everybody's favorite segment, the MLB Power Rankings. Now, if you're a subscriber or been a member of this channel for a while, you knew we missed last week. The All-Star break was happening. I was on a trip to Vegas for the World Series of Poker. It didn't go so well, but we took a week off because I figured it's only 3 games this week and we can cover both weeks in this video, and we're going to do that. So we're going to talk about 9-10 games most of these teams played. Quite a bit of a jumble since our last power rankings, so I hope you guys are excited. Before we jump in, I just got one favor to ask you guys, and I'm going to announce it here today. I'm going to be doing a giveaway if we hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season. 2 months or so, I think we can do it. I'm going to give away 3 baseball hats, and if we do it by August, I'll think of something else, but there'll be extra incentive. So guys, if you are not a subscriber, and I know 80% of you guys that watch this are not, please do me a favor, go down there, hit that subscribe button. I love doing these videos. We do them every week, and I'm giving you more incentive to do other videos throughout the week. Like this past week, I went through all the MLB teams. I graded them all based on the season so far. So if you haven't checked that out, go back. I'll link it, all that fun stuff. Go back, check it out. But guys, we got 30 teams to go through. Normally takes about 20 minutes, so hopefully you don't fall asleep. Number 30, back in the basement, we got the Oakland A's, and the A's, I think, are on like an 8-game losing streak, and they just finished the series with Minnesota, getting swept. They got swept by Boston before the All-Star break, and they went 2-1 against Detroit, so a little bit of incentive there, but the A's this past weekend really cemented me in dropping them back to 30th. They had a couple of leads against Minnesota, and I think there was 2 times at least that they just completely blew it. And I can't really hold out too much more, but number 29, there's not too much difference in these teams. We've got the Kansas City Royals, 0-3 against Minnesota, 1-3 against Cleveland, 1-2 against Tampa. So just continuing to lose every series they play. They're in a position, I think I've talked about this countless times. The draft picks are not going to be working out for them because they've been bad for so long. They're just getting punished now in that aspect of the drafts. Kansas City in a weaker division maybe should pick up a couple of wins here, but Minnesota really laid the smackdown on them, and they just continue to lose. Really, you can interchange those 2 bottom teams. Number 28, and I just finished watching them walk off the Yankees in the 11th. They won the series against the Yankees, but other than that, they haven't had the greatest of time, especially all season. They're by far the worst team in the NL West. They went 0-2 against Houston about 10 days ago, around July 4th. Just a couple games there, and then they went 1-2 against San Fran. What can you say? Rockies kind of suck. Number 27, we got the Chicago White Sox, 0-3 against Toronto, 1-2 against the Cardinals, and then they went 2-1 against Atlanta. Not giving them a whole lot of credit for just winning a series against Atlanta Braves. Atlanta, how many players did they send to the All-Star game? 7, 8, whatever. So a little bit of a hangover there, I suspect. But just picking up a series win against the best team, it's not going to hold too much weight if you've been so bad all season long. Number 26, we got the Washington Nationals, 0-4 against Cincinnati a couple weeks ago. And after that, they managed to beat Texas heading into the All-Star break. And then this weekend, they kind of got beat around by the Cardinals going 1-2. They managed 1 win, but even today, they gave up a lot of runs. Just inconsistency there, not winning series. They managed to steal games here and there, of course, going 0-4 against Cincinnati, against a red-hot Cincinnati team. That really hurts. Can't really see them moving up. They're kind of cemented in this spot. Maybe you could see the White Sox, in my opinion, maybe should be a better team, just not putting it together. But yeah, number 25, and we haven't seen them this low for a long time, but they used to be a staple in the bottom row. We got the Pittsburgh Pirates, 1-3 against the Dodgers, 1-2 against Arizona. And then over this weekend, they got swept by the Giants. So it's pretty clear that Pittsburgh's April and May was probably a fluke now that they're going into the National League West in their past 3 series and getting obliterated in all 3 of those series. Not a whole lot of confidence behind this Pittsburgh Pirates team. It did seem at one point in the National Central that they would have had a shot at the division, but now I figure they're going to finish last in this division. I don't really see it going any other way. Pretty much a staple back in the bottom row. And that's kind of what you see. These teams are all they're all out of it, in my opinion. No shot at making the playoffs. We're starting to get into teams that, while they are doing really bad, they, in theory, in my opinion, still, if they go on a hot streak, could make the playoffs. Number 24, we got the New York Mets. They started things off 3-0 against Arizona about 10 days ago, beginning of July. 1-2 against San Diego. Now 0-2 against the Dodgers. If you're a fan of this channel, you know I filmed this Sunday, right before the last game of the night starts. So that's tonight. It's going to be the Houston Astros and the Angels. That also means that the Dodgers and Mets are still playing their game because they started late today at 2 p.m. So the Mets currently have a 1-0 lead. Sure, they can maybe steal a win off the Dodgers, but it's been pretty atrocious. And I don't expect them to be able to hold the Dodgers to 0 runs. Well, I'm a little concerned if they can score runs. Mets are in a world of hurt. They just can't seem to buy any wins, and they're in the same boat as Pittsburgh, kind of visiting the National League West. And it's starting to show that, in my opinion, the National League West is a powerhouse division on the National League. Number 23, we got the Cardinals, 1-3 against Miami, 2-1 against the White Sox, 2-1 against Washington. So they picked up 2 series wins in a row now, with the All-Star break in between, of course. But they're against 2 of the worst teams, and they're not finding sweeps. And I don't see the Cardinals being the kind of team that is going to find a lot of sweeps, so they're going to have to put up a bunch of series wins in a row if we're going to see them move up this board. And that's a lot of work cut out for them, considering they dug themselves quite the hole. Lucky for them, their division may be up for grabs in general, but they're going to have to start winning a lot more than they are at this point if they're going to be in the playoffs. Nice series win against Washington, nice series win against the White Sox, but not being able to beat teams like the Miami Marlins, teams that are actually in the wild card race, it's going to hurt them, and they're going to be out of it rather soon. Number 22, 1-2 against Oakland, 1-2 against Toronto, 2-1 against Seattle. So no sweeps for Detroit. Playing some tough teams with Toronto, losing the series, managed to pick up a big win there. Win the series against Seattle, so you got to be a little bit excited with that. But losing to Oakland, pretty rough, honestly. And if you had me talking about Detroit all season long, they've been a team of streaks. At one point, I probably had them a little bit higher, even had hopes that they'd be in the playoff run. And then they went on that 10-game losing streak, and it's just been pretty disastrous since then. And I don't see them being able to really turn too far around. If anything, they're more apt to fall down the rankings, in my opinion, than start to move up. They're just not beating the teams that are ahead of them, and that's starting to show. And they're even losing to the number 30 A's. So that really hurts, and that has 21 Seattle, even though Detroit won that series. Seattle, I think, had a pretty good streak going before the All-Star break. They won a big series against the Houston Astros, 3-1. So division rival, a team that's next reigning World Series champs, well, they're beat up. Seattle's taking advantage of it. And then they also beat San Francisco, another team that both these teams were, like, before the All-Star break, top 10 kind of power rankings teams. But kind of concerned with what I saw this past weekend. They didn't build off the momentum. They hosted the All-Star game and all, but still have a long way to go. They have a few teams to hop in. They're pretty much cemented in 4th in that American League West right now. We're going to need to see some very strong baseball from the Mariners if we're going to see them in that playoff race. Number 20, just letting us down all season long. 3-0 against the Angels, 2-1 against the Mets. I did have them marked as 1-3 against Philly. I do know they're tied in like the 9th, 5-5, so I wanted to get this out. Realistically, if they come back and win this game, they're 2-2 against Philly. Maybe a little bit of a streak going here with 2 series wins and then a split with a team like Philly. Got to be pretty excited, but they've fallen behind the 8 ball in this situation. They're a few games under 500 still. They got 3 teams in their division that they have to hop. And this National League wildcard speaks for both wildcards. Super close, and they have a lot of teams to hop. So playing 500, 550 baseball is not going to be enough for San Diego to dig out of this hole. They have a good enough team. They're going to have to find, in my opinion, an 8-game, a 9-game win streak to really get back in contention and bring themselves up to the upper half of the middle row, which means your playoff contention, right? And right now they're on the outside looking in, and that's kind of what this bottom row is. They're all these teams on the outside looking in, and that includes number 19, Chicago Cubs, 2-2 against Milwaukee, 2-1 against the Yankees, 1-2 against Boston. And I know right before that they played the Blue Jays and didn't win that series. So they went and had a couple games with the American League East and didn't win. It's going to be a little bit concerning because, of course, every team plays every team this year, so every team's going to have a shot at the American League East. That was a chance for them to make up some ground in this division. Splitting a series with the Brewers before the All-Star break, another big disappointment. I know that was a series that they kind of got away from them when I was watching it, and the Cubs continue to just not get any momentum going. At this point, they're running out of runway to get back in the race. Again, any of these teams, they kind of need an 8-game win streak to really put themselves back in there. And yeah, but now we're just going to start talking about some teams that they're right in the thick of it. Some of them might have not had great weeks, like number 18 here, the Cleveland Guardians, 0-3 against Texas over the weekend. Before that, they went 1-2 against Atlanta. They did pick up 3 wins against Kansas City Royals, which is massive, especially if they're going to try and keep pace with this Minnesota Twins team that has allowed them to stay in the race. The Guardians are going to have to continue to beat the bad teams in their division. It's going to come down to whether the Guardians can beat the teams that are stronger than them. They got to at least win some series here, because the Twins, that's where they've kind of struggled over the course of the season, so that's how the Guardians are going to make up some pace. They did not do that this weekend, taking a big sweep against them. Texas just coming out with the bats and demolishing them, so they needed to pick up some wins there, and I'm a little concerned at this point. They're starting to fall back behind. They managed to get close to the Twins, but now it's starting to look a little harder. Number 17, we have the LA Angels, 0-3 against the Padres, 0-2 against the Dodgers, and now 1-1 against Houston over the weekend here. Playing tonight for the rubber match, but of course the Angels were a lot higher. I'm still giving them a little bit of credit. If you kind of look at their last 12, 13 games, I think they're 2-11. It's pretty rough, and it's hurting them pretty bad in terms of the standings, playoff chances like that. Expect to see somewhat of a shift, maybe flatten out to 500. It might not be good enough for the Angels to stay in the thick of things, but right now I do consider them in a better position than all these other teams that are making the playoffs. I do think matching up against these teams below them, they're going to win the series more times than not. So I do give that to the Angels. If they fall too far out, we're going to see Ohtani on the market, and that'll be interesting to see. So until that time, we're going to keep them right in the thick of things. Number 16 here, we got the Cincinnati Reds. So the Reds pretty much had a good start into this 2-week span. They swept the Washington Nationals 4-0, but then they had back-to-back series with the All-Star game in between against the Milwaukee Brewers, where combined they went 1-5. Before the break, 1-2. After the break, 0-3. That really hurt them, because I think at one point, a couple weeks ago, I did have them breaking the top 10. They were one of the hottest teams in baseball. Everyone was jumping on their wagon. I was really believing these young guys were fire, but maybe the Brewers have solved them. 3 games in a row there over that 6-game span, they were completely shut out. 2 of the games they lost 1-0, and that hurts, especially when you're talking playoff baseball, tight games and stuff. You got to be able to win those, and maybe the teams are starting to figure out these young guys now that they're starting to get more stats on them. So right there in the middle, still in the hunt, going to be interesting to watch. Number 15. We got the Houston Astros, 2-0 against Colorado, 1-3 against Seattle, and then 1-1 against the Angels. So far, this one has been a little bit of a free fall for Houston. Sure, they haven't been playing greatest baseball. The record's not been stepping up too much. I owe it a lot to their injuries right now. They got Brantley out for the season now with surgery. They got Alvarez, who's on the IR. They got Altuve on the IR. They got 3 of their core 5 pitchers all out right now. McCullers done for the season. Just a lot of injury problems for a World Series team. So a lot of concern here whether they're going to be able to sneak in the playoffs. Right now, I believe they're holding on to that last wild card spot. But if they continue to play the way they are, which I don't really expect them to play any different because it's just the team they have right now, they're going to be on the outside looking in, and that's kind of why I have them number 15. If some of these guys can come back and make a big difference, we'll see. But right now, they got a lot of teams to hop or stay off their back, including the New York Yankees, 2-2 against Baltimore, 1-2 against the Cubs, 1-2 against Colorado. Just a devastating loss today to lose the series in Colorado. They've been lacking Aaron Judge. He should be back soon. We've been seeing him on the field, maybe getting ready to come back. That's going to make a huge difference for this Yankees team because right now they're struggling. not quite. I think they're still half a game up on Boston, but on their way to be last in this division, stacked division. And we know, we've talked about it many times, last place in the AL East means not the playoffs. Kind of goes with number 14. Number 13, we got the Minnesota Twins. 3-0 against Kansas City, 0-3 against Baltimore. So it took a little bit of beating against a top team like Baltimore before the break. And then they come out of the break sweeping Oakland over the weekend. Mind you, there were some nail-biting situations in there. Possibly could have held a loss, but their bats came through. So starting to break out a little bit in this division, kind of what I've expected all season long. They should be having a much bigger gap. In my opinion, it should be at least 10 games difference between them and second place based on the skills of these two teams. But Minnesota taking care of business would have been nice for them if they could have taken at least one game from Baltimore. When we're talking playoff teams, they're probably going to be the worst team in the American League that makes the playoffs. Whatever team wins that division right now, I think it's Minnesota, number 12. We got the Boston Red Sox, 2-1 against Texas, 3-0 against Oakland before the break, and then a 2-1 series against the Cubs over the weekend. They got kind of beat up yesterday against the Cubs, but their bats have been fire. They've been pretty much fire for about a month, this Boston team, but they had dug themselves quite the hole to get out of, but they're working their way to it. The problem with me and my concern with them is, of course, the pitching. The bats definitely seem to be there. The power's there. The lineup's there. Sometimes they fall asleep, but I think that's baseball. I think every team has little lulls in offense. Boston right now, I do have them kind of competing for a playoff spot, and got to be pretty exciting. They're in the top two rows. I think for the first time this season, they might have broached it for 1 week, but I think this is kind of where they're going to be staying if they keep playing, especially if they keep playing like this. Number 11, got the Arizona Diamondbacks, 0-3 against the Mets, 2-1 against Pittsburgh, and 0-3 against Toronto over the weekend here. Arizona, I might have jumped the gun. I had them a lot higher a couple weeks ago. I think I got them as high as 4th. But since then, and I've kind of didn't want to move them up too quickly. I've talked about it pretty much all season. I've thought that their record was much better than their team, but they just kept winning and finding spots and beating teams that were ahead of them. So I had to slowly but surely move them up. What we saw over these past 2 weeks, I think, is a little more in line with this Diamondbacks team. Of course, struggling with Toronto over this past week, and a team that's definitely a powerhouse in the MLB. Arizona's no longer the division leader, and I don't really suspect them to be able to do it. My concern, as it's been all season, has been their depth, especially at pitching. They got a couple stud pitchers, but once you fall off Gallen and Merrill, it starts to be a big concern. Same kind of with their batting order, bottom half, not super great, but at this rate, I do think they're in the hunt definitely for a playoff spot. Number 10, we got the Milwaukee Brewers, 2-2 against the Cubs, and then 6-1 against the Reds. I already talked in depth about it when I was talking about the Reds, so I'm not going to go too much into it. The one thing here is the Brewers are moving up, and they're trying to make a little bit of a gap in their division, and they're doing it. They're beating or at least tying the Cubs in division matchups. And I think if the Brewers can continue to play above 500 in their own division, that's going to be enough to make the playoff spot. Might not be the strongest playoff team, but that's what number 10 is all about. Number 9. Got the San Francisco Giants, 1-2 Seattle, 2-1 Colorado, 3-0 against Pittsburgh. So Giants continue to surprise me, and they're beating up on the teams that are in the bottom row, which is what you need to do if you're going to be a playoff team. And they managed to smash a lot of their division along the way over the past month or so. Giants continue to surprise me. They're one of the more competitive teams day in and day out. And I don't think they're ever an easy out pretty much all season long. Maybe you could give them credit to be a little bit higher. I do think as the season continues on here that some of these other teams are going to surpass them, and I kind of think that's the way, especially number 8. Like, we got the Philadelphia Phillies, 3-0 against Tampa, 1-2 against Miami, and then again, I talked about it with the San Diego Padres. I had them as 3-1 against the Padres. It might be 2-2, depending on how that game ended. I can't see it from here. But the Phillies have kind of shown that they're out of their early season struggles. They're picking up series win after series win. The big sweep against Tampa Bay, I was giving them a lot of credit for before the break, but I was a little concerned when they play up against Miami and they can't win that series. So I do start to think that this AL East is a lot stronger than I gave them credit for, especially number 7, Miami Marlins. did not give them credit like almost all season. 3-1 against St. Louis, 2-1 against Philly. They did get swept by Baltimore over the weekend, but Baltimore, one of the hottest teams in baseball, one of the hottest teams all season long. Miami is, I'm starting to give them credit. I think I got a lot of shade early in the season because I kept them in the bottom row for far too long, and I'm willing to admit when I wasn't ready to turn around. But now that I've seen Miami, I've watched them play a lot more as they've ventured in to play the American League East teams. They're competitive, and on any given night, their pitching has been super solid, and they managed to average quite a bit more runs than I ever suspected that lineup would do, and it seems to be pretty consistent. Of course, when they match up against Atlanta, they just continue to get smashed, so I don't see them as a top row team at this point. They really need to get to that 600 threshold. I don't know if they're capable of it, but when we start looking at them against all these other teams below them, I'm starting to be like, all right, I might lean Miami more often than not. Number 6, moving up a bunch of spots, 3-0 against the White Sox, 2-1 against Detroit, and then 3-0 against Arizona. Toronto is finally getting into form as their team. Arguably, you could be like, hey, why are they in the top row? They're, 7-20 against their own division, something ridiculous like that. They're 0-7 against the 12th place Boston. Yeah, I get it. But this team has struggled most of the season, and they're just starting to get into the form, and they have the roster that I think, in theory, should be a top 3 team. If they keep this going, they'll easily make it into that top 3. This Toronto team's stacked, and they have the components to make a deep run here. They're finally doing it. We're going to see what they can do as they start playing their division again. After this break, they have Boston on deck soon. They have other teams on deck soon. Baltimore. It's going to be interesting how they match up. Of course, when you got 5 teams like in the American League East, who are all pretty much top 14, top 12, all in there. We got 3 teams in the top 6 that we'll get to in a second. You're going to have one team that maybe underperforms division versus division. Maybe that's a little bit of variance with the Toronto Blue Jays. Arguably in that 0-7 against Boston, some of those could have went either way. Could have been easily 2-5, 3-4. They were super close one-run games. Number 5, we got Texas Rangers, 1-2 against Boston, 1-2 against Washington. So I was ready to drop them even farther, but then they had a nice sweep against Cleveland. A little bit of concern the past month. They've mellowed out, but I still have them in the top 5, and I do think they're pretty much a big favorite to win this division, especially with the Houston Astros struggling the way they are, dealing with injuries. Angels can't really get anything going. Seattle's way down here. So Texas should be able to kind of cakewalk, in my opinion, to this division. They still have one of the best lineups for offense in the whole entire MLB. Of course, DeGrom going down for the season, there is concern there, but the rotation's still really strong, so you gotta give them a lot of credit. It's gonna be interesting. Hoping when I go to Toronto in September, I'm gonna watch those 2 teams play. Number 4, we got the LA Dodgers, 3-1 against Pittsburgh, 2-0 against the Angels, 2-0 against the Mets, and they're playing right now. Still down 1-0 to the Mets. I think it's probably the 7th inning by now. So they might lose that series, but the Dodgers have started to fall back to what we expect. They're leading the division. Not a whole lot of challenge. They're winning more games than they're losing. They're playing about 650, 700 baseball. So they're right back into form. Not a whole lot of concerns with the Dodgers right now, and that's rightfully so. Number 3, I have the Tampa Bay Rays. 0-3 against Philly, 1-2 against Atlanta, and only 2-1 against Kansas City. So over the past 6 weeks, I think Tampa's played about 500 baseball. They were cemented at number 1 for, I think, a record amount of time in the power rankings history. But now I'm starting to get concerned. They're really hanging on to number 3 by a thread. Arguably, the power is just not there. The rotation, they're dealing with so many injuries. McClanahan supposed to come back this week and make a start. We'll see how that goes. But as a team that is known for their starting rotation, I think they have 5 of their core starters who have been injured or are injured right now. So they're really relying on the depth. And of course, when you start getting to number 6, number 7, number 8 of your rotation, you're going to run into trouble, especially in a league such as this. So not holding it too much against them, but we do have to start considering that the longer this goes on, the further they're going to fall, the more at risk they're going to be of being in the lower half of the playoff race. At this point, I don't think missing the playoffs is in the question. Like, it's not going to happen, in my opinion. But being a wild card team, definitely possible. because I do believe number 2 is just on fire. Can't believe I'm doing this. 2-2 against the Yankees, 3-0 against Minnesota, 3-0 against Miami over the weekend. So I think they're on an 8-game winning streak. The O's just playing great baseball. Their rotation playing better than I ever expected they would. They have these young guys, this talent is starting to come up, getting some debuts this past week. Their bats maybe cooled off a little bit, but they still seem to have some timely hitting, and they had some comeback against the Miami Marlins. That was a pretty interesting series to watch and a big series to sweep. And sweeping a Minnesota team, pretty massive. So what's going to be interesting with Baltimore, and if they can hold on to this, is when they start playing their division. It's been a little bit quiet in terms of division matchups. Of course, they don't play the division as often as they normally would, but they do have some key series coming up. The division is super tight between Tampa, Baltimore. I think they're 1 game apart now. Toronto's not too far behind, and then we start talking about these other 2 teams. It's a crapshoot. This AL East is going to be super intense. It's going to be interesting how it plays out. Number 1, it's not really too much debate. 2-1 against Cleveland, 2-1 against Tampa, 1-2 against the White Sox. Kind of an average, whatever, kind of couple weeks there, but Atlanta continues to just hit the long ball, and you got to be pumped. Like, this team is pretty much has their division on lock. I think they're 10 games ahead of second place, and no one's really ready to touch them. Of course, we have teams that have beat them, like the White Sox, a little bit of hangover. We saw the Jays sweep them earlier in the season, but every team's going to lose some series. It's all about consistency, and we see that a lot in Atlanta. So they're number 1. And there you guys have it. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you would change, what you agree with in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, smash that like button, all that fun stuff. And guys, we will see you out there for that next video.